Hello, everyone, and welcome to our BCCC webinar, Insights from COP29 and Roadmap to COP30 from Baku to Belem. I would like to introduce Rafael Benke, and Rafael is actually going to say a few words about what we have here, and then I'm going to jump in with a land acknowledgement and with a DEI. So, Rafael, could you tell us a little bit about what's going on? Rafael is chair of the BCCC ESG and Sustainability and founder of the CEO of Proactiva Results. Rafa?
Thank you very much, Peter. Very pleased to be with you in another event of our chamber and of our ESG committee. This time we are focusing, as we did in previous years, on the aftermath of the last climate conference of the parties, COP29. And this event, we framed it in a way that we are also thinking forward, especially on this road from Baku, where COP29 took place, and towards Belem, where the next COP30, when we see round numbers, apparently the expectations also rise. So our road to COP30 that has definitely many challenges, starting with logistics, but not necessarily the topic of this panel. But as we follow every year, we are doing this year with COP29. This is part of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce Excellence Series within the context of our ESG committee, Sustainability Committee. I would like to thank, of course, our annual sponsors, including Vale Base Metals, Mellahawk Logistics, BMA Law, Brookfield, Proactiva Results. And I will, short after the acknowledgement, I will introduce a little further this topic and our special guests today.
Thanks so much, Rafael. Um, it is it's a real pleasure for me to talk about land acknowledgement, and partly I think it's because I come from New Brunswick, and I actually grew up right beside an Indian reservation, and we never associated with anybody from that reservation. And then years later, as I went down and learned a lot of what was going on between the native peoples and the rest of the settlers of European descent, it became something that I think is so important that we acknowledge and that we make sure that we always try to do better in both the management of the land and our association with people. So in this case today, I'm in Mississauga, and this is the land that is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe-Chippewa peoples, home to the Métis and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. Now, the BCCC, which is the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, also has a DEI committee, and we have a DEI mantra by Dr. Laura Mithaw. And this is a really lovely affirmation and aspiration. Together we stand as leaders embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. We recognize that DEI is not just the right thing to do, but essential for our organization's success. We lead the charge, understanding that diversity and inclusion practices must permeate all aspects of our business. It is not a standalone initiative, nor confined to HR policies alone. By weaving DEI into the fabric of our organization, we cultivate an environment where every individual thrives, innovation flourishes, and collective potential is realized. With unwavering commitment, we engage with our employees and members to foster real and sustainable change. Let us forge ahead, united in our mission to create a diverse and inclusive future that transcends boundaries and elevates us all. And with that, I also want to invite our excellent guests, Emily Olson, Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Officer at Valley Base Metals, Katie Sullivan, Global Managing Director at IETA, Luis Gabriel Tortes Azevedo, CSO at IDB Invest, and Rodrigo Lima, Managing Director at Agrocoin Limitada, to join Rafael and to continue the discussion on COP29 and COP30. Over to you, Rafael.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. I think this we will share with you, and Khalil will share with the participants the full or the short bio actually of each of the participants. But these are practitioners, experts, authorities, I should say, in this area. They've been following this subject in different capacities with different hats, but they've been permanent in following and protagonizing, I would say, some of the actions around climate change discussions, about regulatory matters, about technical matters. So it is really a pleasure and an honor to have Emily, Katie, Gabrielle, and Rodrigo with us. I think we will really be able to have a unique snapshot of what took place in COP29 and what we should expect about COP30. Of course, when we're talking about COP and previous to every COP, the bar is very high in terms of expectations. At the end of every COP, there is the usual sentence about frustrations, and there is always something positive as a step of in this road of construction, right? Of better performance on what we do. We're still very far from the goal of 1.5 degree reduction. It is a big challenge. It is a global challenge, and it is in fora like this, like COP29, like the COP meetings, or where I was last week in the UN Forum Business and Human Rights, where you see the value, the relevance, and the need for this collective fora. There is no way that one country alone or another country alone will move the world. And of course, moving the world is not an easy task. It takes a step-by-step approach. It takes mobilization and takes sensitizing people about what is emergent. And we are living an emergency, right? We are living a climate crisis. We are feeling already the impacts of extreme events deriving from this, and real impacts already on assets, and also real impacts on people, right? And as we do here in the chamber, we have a strong connection between the environmental aspects, the human rights aspects, and also the economic aspects. And we see day by day how much this is interconnected. And with this emergency crisis, we also have a humanitarian crisis emerging. It is a major issue. And this is why the discussions around decarbonization, around adaptation and resilience, around climate financing, and bottom line global collaboration were on the table this year, as it was in previous years. And let's learn directly from our specialists what they have for us to say. So let's start let's kickstart already with Emily. In what the way we'll approach it is, we'll have each of our speakers bringing a little snapshot of what they want to put on the table for the panel. And following up on that, we may have some additional remarks from the panelists, as well as some cross-referencing and follow-up questions I will probably ask. If you who are watching us right now would like to ask a question, please use the chat. We'll try to answer most of the questions if time permits. and otherwise we'll try to reply afterwards. So with that and no further ado, please, Emily, let's hear you.
No, thank you, Raphael, and thank you all for inviting me. It's a great opportunity to talk about different perspectives, right? And I was thinking as I was preparing for this conversation, how much change happens in a year, from COP to COP, and how we always are having to think ahead and try to strategize and think about what's coming around the corner. And so for me, every COP brings, a new landscape, right? And I think this year, no doubt, has been one of lots of change globally. I mean, I think we had this was the 2024 was the year of the most presidential and prime ministerial elections around the world, which ushers in so much change across the global landscape. And climate and the work we all do is always core to those changes and those policy directives. And so reflecting back from last year to this year, the world is continuously changing. And I think, when I reflect on our time at COP this year, the things that as a mining company, a Brazilian mining company headquartered in Canada, right, with global partners, right, my stakeholder set is very dynamic, each with different lenses on how we look at climate, but universally aligned on its importance. And so coming out of COP, I think I'll give a few takeaways, not to take up too much time because I'm anxious to hear from my fellow panelists. But for me, coming as a critical minerals producer, in Canada and in Brazil, Indonesia, right? Very different and distinct geographies and very natural resource endowed, right? And so for the first time, I think at this COP, I was very pleased that critical minerals was getting the attention I truly believe it deserved. As we think about the role the natural resource sector plays in delivering climate action to the world, particularly looking at critical minerals, right? As we look to enable and accelerate the transition, we need mining. And I truly believe that. We need responsible, sustainable mining. And I think for me, this COP really opened up a broader conversation about the role critical minerals can and should play. Looking at it not just from taking ore out of the ground, but what are those longer term value impacts for critical minerals? And equally, as all COPs, right? This is the nexus of civil society, politics, and policy, and how we then bring those points together. And Raphael, you hit it on the head in your introduction, that again, we can never lose sight of the importance of integration. And so again, looking at the critical minerals piece this year at COP, it was a topic for everyone, right? Everyone's trying to understand how to grow economically, do so responsibly with a deep commitment to that just transition. And I would say on the critical minerals piece, mining's been around for a long time, but putting in a context of climate and the transition, I feel is still nascent, right? We're still coming into that. And as I look forward to COP30, really understanding and pushing on how we have more meaningful conversations about policy and how we enable meaningful and strong policy that incorporates economic development, social and shared value and environmental protections. And so for me, I think the big takeaway for COP this year was that we had a platform in which to talk about these issues that we tend to talk at on the periphery and not collectively together. And so that was really meaningful. And then, the last point I would make is that, I was very pleased to see climate finance. I know it's a finance COP, but having meaningful conversation related to private flows of capital, looking at government partnerships, looking at how we unlock capital for climate financing. I think this next decade is going to be critical to ensuring that we are thinking of things in a collective way. And, you know, coming from the private sector, right, you know, I think we have a very good view on how we can help unlock those private flows of capital, where we see the benefit, but it's not a linear conversation, right? You know, you need the NGOs, you need governments at the table. And I do think, you know, I'm always an optimist here. And so I think having the start of those conversations and continuing those conversations at COP29 and moving into Belem, we can't lose sight of that. You know, climate finance will be key to moving the dial in a meaningful way for me as I think about the roles we each need to play. And so again, those are just some quick reflections in our COP, is that, you know, having the critical minerals dialogue and thinking about natural resource endowments and beneficiation in a collective, not a siloed way, was very important. And then really continuing to hammer home on how we attack climate finance. And lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't say this, especially as a company who operates in the Amazon, you know, the true focus on climate and nature and its importance and integration in how businesses look at their own strategies, but also how we can collectively attack that challenge as well. And so, you know, I'm a big believer in the nature-based solutions and how we are good miners are the stewards of the land. And so that is a really critical element to how we think about our role in the broader agenda. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Emily. Very, very interesting. And I think you brought already the angle and the challenges regarding the mining sector. We have a sector specialist here, Rodrigo, he will bring no doubt a broad perspective, but I think he might want also to bring some specifics on agriculture, where he is a specialist. But I'm going to actually shift to Gabriel, Emily, because you spoke of finance, right? And I think this was one of the highlights of Baku, right? And also there was some confusion on the text by some of the external people who were not in the rooms negotiating the tax. So 300 billion here, 1 trillion there, 200, and so where by 2035 by so but putting the numbers straight, and also what and how critical it is, as you're saying, Emily, the finance of it. We won't be able to respond to what is needed in the pace that is needed if we don't talk about money, right? And in every time, in every COP, the financial discussions is one of the last in the item of the agenda, right? Not by chance. It's not only because it's difficult to tackle, but you need to understand the structures and where you're going, and then talk about resources. But what happens is that the discussions around finance many times are a bit squeezed. So I don't know how it happened in Baku specifically. Let's hear from Gabriel, and let's hear what we've achieved and what we have ahead of us towards COP30.
Thank you, Rafael, and no, thanks to the Chamber for the invite. It's great to be here with our audience online and with Emily, Katie, Peter, Rodrigo, and yourself, Rafael. It is a pleasure. I think on your introduction, you mentioned that we should not talk about our frustrations with COP29, so I will try to avoid that, and I will just say that I will try to focus on this duality between the macro, which for us was very disappointing, the lack of ambition and the lack of commitment, I think, on a broad global level, and focus on the micro, in which I thought a lot of very interesting things happened and came out. And on the aspect of finance, many have referred to COP29 as the finance COP. And I think there have been some very, very important outcomes prior to and after the COP in terms of finance. I will just highlight a few points which I think led to that, and then I will narrow down to some of the financing aspects. Number one, from the positive outcomes of the COP, I saw a lot more engagement. We work with the private sector, right? We are a development bank that works with the private sector in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I saw a lot more engagement with the private sector on COP29 than in previous COPs, and an engagement in which companies and investors and financiers shift the goal from perhaps observing trends and positioning themselves as major actors on the process forward, and looking for business opportunities that make sense for their bottom line, but make sense either for just transition and climate and other aspects. So that was a positive. I also saw a lot of recognition and discussion about financial innovation, that perhaps our pool of products and services in the financial sector need to be broadened and need to be adapted to the opportunities and challenges of the transition that lies ahead. So that was also very positive. I think Emily mentioned the aspect between the close relationship between nature and climate. I thought that was a good aspect to discuss at the COP. And for us, being a development bank, I really enjoyed the outcome on many of the discussions regarding just transition, how we bring this jargon that may mean 1,000 things down to earth and land it to specifics, what it means for specific groups, what it means for poverty, what it means for indigenous people, what it means to youth, to the silver economy, to gender. So those aspects I thought were very positive. Now, in terms of financing, one of the positive outcomes that I also saw from the COP in terms of our own engagement with our shareholders and our donors was a broadening and in scope of donors focusing on blended finance. Blended finance is key to leverage some of the climate solutions that we are looking at moving forward. And originally, most of the resources for blended finance were focused on mitigation only, and on not so much on economic productive sectors, but more on conservation aspects, which are necessary. But I saw a shift now in many of the donors on blended finance with a stronger focus on adaptation, which I think it's critically necessary, especially in our part of the world, but also on decarbonization, hard to abate sector. So going to the core of some of the issues, which is fundamental. Yeah, it does represent reputational risk, right? For a donor to allocate blended resources to a cement decarbonization project or to a siderurgical project, but the impacts could be very significant. So those are some of the aspects that I thought emerged very quickly on financing. The 300 billion for me was really disappointing. Just to give you another magnitude. Oh, and one other interesting thing from the MDB world, from the multilateral development banks, we are finally able to agree before the COP on a single accounting methodology and reporting system. And the World Bank, the IFC, IDB, and IDB Invest were the first to adopt it. So the numbers that we're going to be reporting forward as MDBs, they're going to all adhere to the same accounting process and to the same reporting standards, which is very good. So we are comparing apples with apples. And so if we follow that methodology, in 2023, the MDBs altogether allocated 125 billion to climate financing, out of which 75 billion to what we call or define as low and middle income countries, and 28 billion of those 125 for adaptation projects. So as you see, 300 billion, it's not what we need. It's not a lot. But again, hopefully the confusion in the text will open the doors, thinking of Belem for a more ambitious goal. And there, I think, if we consider the fiscal space of most of our countries, even the developed economies. And I'll try to wrap up soon because I know time and we want to talk. The bulk of that finance needs to come from the private sector. And again, the opportunities that we have is how we develop businesses that make sense for the triple P, for planet, people, and profits. And I think that's one of the discussions that we're going to have to look into moving to Belem. And just to close my introduction, when we think about COP30, I think the region, and the region being Latin America and the Caribbean, is a very well positioned for COP30 in the sense that perhaps it is the first time in recent history that Latin America presents itself as a giver, not a taker, in the sense of being able to provide solutions to some of the most critical global challenges related to climate, but related to poverty, related to growth. And just to mention a few, food security is one of them, and I believe Rodrigo is going to touch on that. Energy transition, Latin America, another powerhouse, and then other climate and environmental services, right? And when I say energy transition, just referring to what Emily said, I'm also referring about, for instance, extractivism and transition minerals and critical minerals as well. So I think that is a unique opportunity. We just came out from a G20 that was led by Brazil, right? Going into the COP, we had and we have the setup. So I think it is an opportunity for the region to take on a more proactive leadership role. And as a bank operating in Latin America, we are fully committed to supporting that process and to work with our countries on their financing needs. We have an aspiration of increasing our own lending and our own allocation of resources to climate finance quite substantially by 2030 and then 2035. So that the other banks. So I will stop here. And again, very excited to be in this discussion and looking forward to hearing from the other panelists and from our audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. That was very useful. I think it will be interesting to go back to you on you spoke of planet, people, and profits, and specifically what you saw in terms of positive step in the definitions of just transition. So it will be interesting to hear from you. It will be interesting to hear from Emily when we go back also on this angle of mining, particularly mining of critical minerals as a strategic partner to energy transition. And I think we have now Katie and Rodrigo. So Katie, I'll leave you to wrap up the session. I'll ask Rodrigo to give his initial snapshot. There are also interesting things going on in Brazil, regulation of a carbon market. And of course, Katie, we want to hear from you. How are the incentives to move this economy towards the new economy, a low carbon economy? And but Rodrigo, let's start with you, and then we have the wrap up by Katie, and then we engage in some exchange.
Thanks, Rafael, Peter, as well. Thank you so much, BCCC, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to join this very flourishing debate. Sorry for my voice, but Baku brought me back home with some cough and some ear issues. As a lot of people at the end of the COPs get sick, and it's becoming very very common due to the logistics and long days at the COPs. But that's fine. I would start saying that we got no decision about what is about the Just Transition Work Program. This is one of the hard topics in Baku, and just getting your point, Rafael, because it's extremely extremely hard to agree on key elements of the just transition agenda, because for some, mining is totally out of what does this mean, just transition. And come on, if we don't have mining, we won't have just transition, no matter if you like or not. And what does this mean, just transition in agriculture, for example? And there's plenty of views saying that the transition of not agriculture, but the food systems transition will only accept regenerative agriculture. And what does this mean, regenerative agriculture? Because there's plenty of examples and approaches, and for some it's just agroecology. So if it's not plant-based or very little intake of animal protein, we are out of a concept of just transition. But come on, one of the key elements when it comes to the whole debate of food systems transition and agriculture at the UNFCCC, it's delivering food to everyone, and nutritious food to everyone, and avoiding food insecurity. And when I see that there's 141 nationally determined contributions comprising agriculture at their scope, what does this mean that 141 parties are willing to adopt and are already adopting actions on agriculture when it comes to win-win approaches of agriculture and climate and so on? And actually, the Sharm el-Sheikh group on agriculture got to a very good decision in Baku. The online portal, it is already online at the UNFCCC website, and it will be improved to the Bonn meeting in June next year. And we'll be able to get to COP30 in Brazil with hopefully at least 20-30 parties submitting their actions on agriculture, which will allow the world thinking multilaterally to understand what is at stake when it comes to parties' actions on agriculture, what they are willing to do, what kind of technologies they are willing to adopt, and how to connect finance. Because finance, as Gabriel and Emily were speaking, it's at the heart of every climate action every country are willing to adopt. And then I jump to the finance decision. The 300 billion, yes, it is not good as it was expected, but I traveled to Baku with my foot on the ground in terms of a basic ambition in terms of new money on the table. Because if we see the 100 billion commitment from Copenhagen in 2009 and the debate about if developed countries accomplish the target or not, and the OECD report on yes, we accomplished the target, we surpassed 100 billion last year, because we need to see the different sources of money on the table to get to the more than 100 billion or not. And as Gabriel mentioned, the role of the development banks and so on. So the 300 billion target of money coming from developed countries from multiple sources, plus the 1.3 trillion target for every country, and the debates that will be enacted to be able to define the sources of this 1.3 trillion. For me, it's a decision that it's not the best one. Yes, it's not the best, but we need to recognize, and Baku for me simply highlights this view that we are negotiating on a multilateral perspective, but multilateralism is on crisis everywhere, not just at UNFCCC. And so I didn't expect 2 trillion per year as a target and 1 trillion just from developed countries, because I don't believe on that for a long time. But I don't mean to be it's missing the word in English, but I don't mean to be someone that doesn't believe on the agenda, because I really believe, because climate actions, it's about development. Producing more agriculture using low carbon technologies is good for agriculture, is good for climate. Reducing emissions on different sectors and changing technologies and doing the transitions we need are extremely relevant for development. And then we combine different SDGs together with SDG 13, not just SDG 13. So in my mind, how finance will evolve, and it's extremely important, Gabriel, to listen to you when you say that the NDBs have agreed on a common methodology to report and to be able to prove what is climate finance for them. This is one of the key obstacles of the climate finance agenda at the UNFCCC today. And so I'm not sad with the outcomes, because again, we have COP every year, and I don't believe that every COP will save the world, but we are agreeing decisions that will be able to pave a new future based on the decisions, on the actions. And then I see the private sector involved, and the private sector is involved and will be, especially because now we are combining with finance. And what I tend to see is that finance for sectors that are not acting from a climate perspective will become more expensive. The costs of capital for those that are not acting from a climate perspective will increase. And this is why a lot of stakeholders and a lot of sectors are extremely involved, not just because the cost of capital, but because they must do that for several reasons. And
Rodrigo, if I may, I think we can shift them to discussions. Maybe I don't know if you want to wrap up, or if you have a final thought. But otherwise, I will shift to Katie. But I would like to continue on the point you're raising, and after Katie brings her initial remarks, going back to Gabriel, right? Because I think where we should or not be happy or satisfied with the levels of ambitions of financing should have a connection with what needs to be done by a certain time, right? And we just heard from Gabriel that using the aligned methodology of the MDBs in 2023 alone, 125 billion were already invested in climate financing, right? So how can we be happy with the 300 billion if the MDBs are already investing that in 1 year in 120 billion? So that's a question for Gabriel. It's really a question. And where should we actually put the bar for that? And we know that some development banks and be it in the public segment or the private segment, IDB Invest as an example. I believe IDB Invest is doubling its capital. I think Gabriel could maybe enlighten us on what is happening with IDB Invest right now, which seems to be very good news. But let's leave this as a follow-up. And Katie, if you could bring your thoughts, we are very, very curious.
Thank you so much, Rafael, and to Khalil, the Brazil, Canada Chamber of Commerce. I can't remember. I know we were together at a PDAC at some point. There was another post-COP briefing, Raphael, that had brought us together. It all kind of blends together over the years sometimes. But I am really thrilled to be here. And I'm quite bullish on the opportunity for Brazil and Canada businesses, industry, financiers with fellow travelers like IDB as we head to COP30. I think there's some really, really important opportunities to showcase leadership on financing, on decarbonization efforts, on working very closely with governments to make it clear what should be done, what clarity could be provided to drive investments and financing. And I was in Azerbaijan, like Rodrigo. I kind of lost my voice, and I think we're all still recovering. I think it was my 15th or 16th COP. I will say, logistically, they hit it out of the park. Logistically, it was around 50,000 people in the end, and it was really quite impressive. For those who don't know AIDA, this is our 25th year anniversary, and we came out of UN negotiations as Kyoto was being negotiated, that global voice of well-designed markets to tackle climate change. So we remain very, very present around the negotiating rooms at every COP and bringing business voice, in particular in the Paris Agreement context, to Article 6. The markets articles, which I will elaborate on in a bit more about the success that we saw finally coming out of Baku. We also gather many businesses and other stakeholders on the grounds at COP every year for the 2 weeks. Have a big business hub pavilion, we call it. Emily, I hung out with Valet folks, Gabrielle, definitely IDB. I don't think we hung out at all. But really over the course of the entire 2 weeks, we're doing spotlight deep dives, discussions on nature-based solutions, carbon dioxide removals, RED+, energy transition, food security, you name it, right? And a little plug that all the recordings for those pavilion sessions are available online on AIDA's website. So that, along with Khalil, there will be a few other detailed, very geeky, nerdy updates that we have specific to Article 6 that I can share with Khalil with attendees post-event if you're interested. But we only have time to really go after the higher level reflections, at least at this stage in my initial intervention, Raphael. So before the Article 6, I do want to say, and maybe I won't be as diplomatic as Rodrigo, it was an extremely challenging and difficult negotiation with an extremely challenging and difficult geopolitical backdrop. And you did have the election that occurred, the US election the week before. So that elephant was in every single room, rooms plural, there was the elephant, right? We do know that we have the Trump administration coming back. We do know some of the signals that potentially the US could pull out of Paris again, right? So that combined with just a very broad, challenging geopolitical landscape these days. So finance was always on the top of the docket. It was the Azerbaijan presidency's #1 priority, was the new collective quantified goal, the NCQG, right? So getting some clarity on an updated climate finance target. #2 on that priority list was finally nailing down the Article 6 rulebook, which had lingered for 9 years. So you did have the NCQG, again, 300 billion. It's not enough, right? There were frustrations, including many parties like India and Nigeria, after that amount was gavelled through, that had very strong and passionate interventions that this was not enough. And it was, in fact, quite insulting in some ways. But there is that clear framing towards the 1.3 trillion per year by 2035. And this is the Baku to Belem roadmap to the 1.3 trillion. And that's going to take a lot of big effort across parties and other stakeholder groups to get some kind of how to scale and reach the 1.3 trillion by the time we get to Belem. On Article 6, now again, Raphael, you've known me for a while. You know that it's near and dear to our hearts, but it should be near and dear to every, not just business heart out there, but parties, governments, right? How to drive the private finance at scale. And this is the golden thread of cooperation, we call it in the rule book. So as I said, it's 9 years that we've seen these quite complicated technical negotiations. And we now finally have a complete Paris rulebook, now with some rules guidance for Article 6. And it's really implementation time. That's what it means. So now our focus, at least through 2028, because now Article 6 negotiations done. There isn't a new work plan for next year, work program. Next time it reopens is 2028 for Article 6. So it is at the highest level paving the new era, we like to think, in carbon markets through Article 6. There are 2 parts to it, Article 6.4. So this is the new UN administered crediting mechanism, the 6.4 mechanism, top down, available to all who choose to use, want to use. And then Article 6.2 is the clear accounting, the rules, the guidance for bilateral bottom-up trading. These are trading in these internationally transferred mitigation outcomes across borders to drive financing, enhance ambition. For Article 6.4, again, that top down, here's the new name, right? It's the Paris Agreement Crediting Mechanism. It's PACM, we call it. Think Pac-Man, PACM. So like under Kyoto, you had CDM, well, now we have PACM. This is the top-down new and Paris Agreement crediting mechanism. And on day 1, there was success already that day, because you saw the CMA actually taking note of new standards on methodologies and removals, carbon dioxide removals for the 6.4 supervisory body for this new mechanism. Then we had a bunch of challenges in between, and then on the last day, you had more Article 6 rules gabbled through, including 6.4 decisions. So again, I will not get into weedy stuff, but we finally have clarity on host country authorizations, on clarifications between registries, projects in least developed countries and SIDS that are exempted from share proceeds. On the Article 6.2 decisions, there is some interplay across these, but again, this is the bottom up. We finally got some decisions on authorizations, some pretty meaty clarity around different components to authorizing ITMOs. You have applications of first transfer clarity now, sequencing of initial reporting, annual information, reviews, international registries. Again, the infrastructure, absolutely critical between national registries, the international registry, 6.4 registries. So the point is that business finally has some clear rules of the game to actually make things more investable, financeable. They can start to plan, and there's a lot of work. Just because the negotiations, Raphael, one sec, just because the negotiations won't be opening up again, thankfully, until 2028 on this, it doesn't mean 2025 isn't a very heavy year for still work to be done at the 6.4 supervisory body. They're going to be developing new forms and templates and blessing certain methodologies, transitioning existing methodologies into now what will be Article 6.4 credits that can be used. So the call to your stakeholders and attendees is for business. 2025 is going to be very important for consultations with the 6.4 supervisory body. It's also very, very importantly going to be game time to work with governments to actually be very clear as they update their nationally determined contributions, the NDCs 3.0, that there's explicit reflection on how they plan to use international markets and Article 6, what projects could be eligible, right, to generate these credits, clear frameworks that allow for businesses to be more confident in what they're investing in and how these trades could occur. So I'll leave it at that. I look forward to the discussion, but thank you for allowing me to provide a bit of an update on the Article 6. It's a big, big, big win for all of us, and we should be leaning into it. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. This was very enlightening. Thank you very much for your snapshot I would like to go back to you, Katie, in a while for you to bring us a bit in depth. What is your take around carbon markets, right, and how they are evolving? How much this was discussed, not only at the core of the negotiations, but also in side events and lateral meetings. And you touched on a point that is interesting regarding these negotiations that I would like to hear from Rodrigo, from Emily, and yourself, Katie, which is the geopolitics, right, or geopolitics of what we are facing. And it would be interesting to understand what can you what is fundamental to be advanced at a multilateral level, and what can be advanced at the national or bilateral or regional level, and where we are at, right? What happens if major players, in that case, in the scenario you brought, US pulling out of Paris Agreement and having a scenario where US won't be so active, what happens with what we have at stakes? And thinking of COP30, what can happen within this year until Belem, with how the new administration in US will act, and how much things may or not derail towards, and what can derail towards COP30. So that would be interesting to hear from the three of you. And I speak the three of you because right now I'll put Gabriel back on a spot regarding financing, right? But maybe, Gabriel, first thing you want to share with us is what is happening to IDB Invest, because I think this is good news. And then we can talk about the broad global aspect on commitments and what could we aspire, and what can we actually aspire for COP30, having in mind what we've reached in COP29.
Okay, I'll try to be brief but direct and link to some of what was said, especially sectors such as agro, because what you hear, and mining for Emily. Just going back 1 year to New Delhi and the New Delhi resolution by the countries, the G20 countries, New Delhi resolution. For those of you who read the resolution, there's a couple paragraphs on MDB reforms, right? Reforming multilateral development banks. And we are very fortunate at IDB Invest because we had started a year before that our own reform, no? And part of what the G20s are indicating to the MDBs is, okay, you have really to think outside the box. You have to be able to take more risk. You have to be able to optimize your capital allocation. You have to be bolder. So what has happened in IDB Invest before that, we started with the process of not seeking more funding from our shareholders, but really realizing what can we do different so that we can raise our level of ambition on key topics such as climate and GDI, for instance, to our development agenda, recognizing the role of a private sector in our region that needs to grow. We need more investment and all of that. So basically, we redefine our level of ambition and present ourselves. For instance, when I say our level of ambition, the MDB world has a very traditional model that we call buy and hold. So you do a loan or you do an operation, you hold on your balance sheet for a long time, and usually you are the lead investor. Not usually, always you are the lead investor on that operation. So for instance, part of our realization 2 years back was, okay, if we really want to bring new and fresh capital into Latin America and the Caribbean, if we really want to bring innovation and risk-taking, we need to get away from the traditional model of buy and hold, and we need to position ourselves not as a lead investor, but as a conduit to entice other investors to come in. And we define and call that model originate to share. And please note, it's not originate to sell. We will always keep skin on the game, but originate to share means that we are going to use our abilities, to entice and to induce and to catalyze and to bring other investors into developmental projects in our region. And based on that, we realized that if we want to make a difference with that new vision, we need a stronger capital backing. We need a stronger, because when we talk about taking more risk for a bank, that means doing triple Cs or doing projects that are beyond our current risk appetite in terms of potential losses. But if done right, they can be very impactful and they can set up open doors to other areas. So for that, we would need a stronger capital backing, and our shareholders came in really strong and really support that idea and doubled, a little over double our capital, which will allow us to grow quite significantly in the region. But the message that they gave it to us, which was very clear, is we are not allocating more capital to your balance sheet so you can do more of the same. We are allocating more capital to your balance sheet so that you can be different and achieve that level of ambition. So that means, doing riskier projects, being in economies in which the private sector has not flourished yet, smaller economies where you can make a difference. The Caribbean islands are an example, and you have helped us, for instance, in Central America, in other countries, Rafael, so you know what we are talking about. It means engaging in sectors where you have not been before, simply because it was too risky, not necessarily financial, but reputational. Give you an example: mining. IDB Invest hadn't done a mining project in 9 years, simply because we could do all the business our capital allowed us to. So the cash wasn't that simple, but say, why do it, right? We defined a new mining strategy last year, and we already approved a very substantial loan to a lithium project in Argentina, and we are talking with companies that are investing in Brazil and in other countries in Latin America. So that's another, one other example. We, during COP29 in Baku, I was with the governor of Pará, who launched the first PPP, public-private partnership tender for the concession of a state area of 100,000 hectares, Triunfo do Xingu, for forest regeneration, for regeneration of forest, and a very significant part of the revenue stream of that project is going to come from voluntary market. No MDB has ever touched voluntary markets. We are looking at it very seriously, and we are bringing the IDB to issue a guarantee for the state of Pará. So that's a little bit of this process that we're going to. And this means stronger field presence. It means doing things that we haven't done before. And by that, we're going to have to bring in new capacities that we currently don't have. Again, mine is one of them. The food and climate nexus, Rodrigo is here. We have been strong in agribusiness. But for instance, we have not engaged, and Rodrigo was in Baku, and I have all these pictures from my pictures in Baku of people protesting on animal protein. I don't want to take a position here, but here's the thing: you cannot move the needle in the Amazon if you do not work with the cattle ranchers. As simple as that. If you don't work with the mining sector and the cattle ranchers in the Amazon, you're fooling yourselves if you're going to invert the dynamic of deforestation in the Amazon. So you have to engage those sectors. That's as simple as that. So that's part of the process that we're going through. I don't want to use more time because I obviously want to hear from the others, but it's challenging, but it's very exciting. We are learning a lot. We are working very hard. We're making mistakes. That's part of the process, but we're excited with this prospect, and we hope to be successful in our goal of becoming a conduit to bring other investors into the real economy sectors in Latin America and the Caribbean. And again, that's something that we want to do. And by COP30, we hope to have some very interesting, very innovative projects in some of these major sectors to announce, and that hopefully will be under implementation, because the Amazon is one of our key priorities for the IDB group. I'll stop here, Rodrigo. Glad to answer more questions as they come.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. I think very, very interesting. And I believe you gave very concrete examples of how much come with just the figures, right? Because the leverage that these figures, the surrounding of what gravitates around the money is really amazing. That is what maybe mobilizes change.
Yeah, can I say just something very quickly to complement? And the other part of it is it's broadening the menu of financial instrument. And by that, I mean, most of the MDBs started as a single product banks. Like we do loans in dollars. Today, IDB investors have 38 products. And people say, is this enough? No, it's not enough. It's not enough. No, because institutional investors in Europe need something. Institutional investors in Canada, for instance, Brookfield is one of our good clients. They need something else. Their interest is different. So you need to have a menu, right? Because the original, I don't want to use the word arrogant, but the original self-centered approach of large banks was, well, the world needs to adapt to us. Well, news, we are very small to ask the world to do that. So we need to adapt to those words. For instance, one thing that we do very little, still very little in I'll just finish up with two thoughts if we're talking about finance. Equity. No, we don't play equity enough in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we need, you know that song, Sweet Love? If we want to change the climate, we need sweet equity. We need to work with sweet equity. We need to entice investors to do that. And then capital markets. When we talk about the comparative advantages of Latin America, and we have been the main supporter of thematic bonds in Latin America. We have, over the past 5 years, we have supported 46 thematic bonds. We're the first on blue bonds, we're the first on gender bonds, and so on and so forth, with our clients, obviously, in Latin America. But if you look at the aggregate that has been allocated to thematic bonds in the world over the past 3 years, only 4% went to Latin America, only 4%. Over 50% went to the developed economies. No, and simply because of risk factors, right? Or risk perceptions or lack of knowledge. But if you look at the proportional benefits to agendas such as climate, no, they're much bigger in Latin America or in Africa. So if we are serious about making a difference, we need to invert that allocation of resources.
Thank you, Gabriel. And you brought inspiration of music to your remarks, and I think in this collective dancing of the collective dance of the COPs, it's much beyond tango, right? Where it just takes two. And I think I will use that to shift to the geopolitical scenarios. I think Emily introduced her speech very well by reminding us that around half of the world changed leadership this year, right? And okay, over 70 countries is a lot, but there is one country called United States which brings a lot of impact as well. So we have half of the world changing leadership. We have the United States changing leadership, changing leadership to a change, right? And how are these scenarios projected, right? So thinking 2025, and we'll go back to a few technical aspects that are being asked by the audience on carbon markets and so on. So feel free to continue asking your questions. We'll come back to that, but let's start laying the ground to what we have to think about the road to COP30 in these geopolitical scenarios. But we can discuss a lot. We can have our expectations, but when it hits the road, it's about what is happening in the world, right? So on the geopolitics, Rodrigo, Emily, and Katie, I'd love to have your take. Let's start with you, Katie, on this.
Yes, I'm busy answering some questions that have come through. As I said at the beginning, when it comes to some of the more technical but very important decisions that were made on Article 6, I strongly encourage people to read the IETA post-COP report that was just published a few days ago to really get into the weeds. So geopolitically, yeah, multilateralism, spirit of cooperation, not in the air. right now, it's tough. And multilateralism was truly, truly tested in Baku, and it will continue to be tested in a very big way. Do keep in mind that if the US does choose to pull out of Paris Agreement, and if it's, say, early Q1 next year, it will be a full year until it officially can leave the Paris Agreement. You also have to watch out about whether they choose to leave the UNFCCC, the actual framework convention, right? That did not happen the first time, but that is kind of being discussed. And that's a much, much more problematic situation. But one thing that was not brought up in my initial remarks, and it hasn't been brought up yet today, is the shadow of, we call the shadow of CBAM. You had border carbon adjustments that came up a lot more than you ever have seen, and that's not surprising, in Baku. So we've ever seen before at a COP, right? So these unilateral trade measures with climate, and a lot of this is the pressure that we're seeing coming out of Brussels in Europe on the border carbon adjustment. It's no longer an academic exercise, right? This is coming, it is hitting. There are many trade partners, including the industries from those trade partners, that are taking it very seriously, are concerned about it in some ways, also are preparing their domestic programs, though. So that's this whole surge of domestic, national carbon markets, domestic emissions trading systems, compliance, regulated, including monitoring, reporting, the verification, the registries. That's not surprising, right? Like, there is a very valid reason why a lot of these countries, including Brazil, right? We can talk about that later, but there's a lot of countries where there's a groundswell of being prepared and thinking about it through the lens of, you know, these border carbon adjustments that are coming or could potentially be coming down the pike. Right. And that is going to be increasing in attention through Belem. It's now actually a part of the response measure program, is looking at trade related issues and response measures. I think the other thing is, G20, G7, the BRICS, like all these other fora for multilateralism, where climate is very much a big part of it and will continue to be a part of it, along with trade, right? And opportunities for lower carbon products, that is going to increase significantly next year. And I think that there's a lot on the shoulders of Brazil, hopefully in a good way, to help shepherd some of these multilateral fora and also make sure there's no disjointment, right? That there is at least some kind of collaboration, alignment, as the rules of the game under the COP process, right, is somehow aligned, facilitating what we're seeing in the G7 on its, or in the G20 or the BRICS. So I'll leave it at that, Raphael. But yeah, we're entering a brave new world.
That's great, Katie, and you touched on some aspects where Rodrigo can add value, which is this trade arena, right? And I think we are overlapping two systems, one that is in need of getting traction and taking off with the goals we have of decarbonization and lowering our temperature, and how much we need the support also of trade in that regard, and how much trade will appear in sticks and carrots for that. But we are also leaning towards a system that I don't have to hide words, is in disarray, right? And it hasn't been functional for a long time, right? And with the prospects of what we have in 2025 and linear tariffs across the board in major economies, it doesn't seem that we'll have a particular leverage there. But let's hear Rodrigo going back to the key point we want to discuss now in these minutes is 2025 road to Baku. We have half of the world under new leadership, especially the US. Where are we going to, right? Maybe you.
Thanks, Rafael. And I agree 100% with Katie. the CBAM, it's an amazing example of how US companies will need to be connected to climate actions, regardless the fact that the US as a country can abandon the Paris Agreement or even the UNFCCC. Why? Because this is business, this is finance, and they will need to be engaged, like it or not, because otherwise they will have problems to compete and even to produce in some cases. So for me, we are living the fragmentation of multilateralism, and on climate, this is extremely. It's just there. You cannot hide yourself from the monster when there's a lot of examples popping up and creating new realities, and companies must be there and must be prepared to produce and to have their climate policies, their strategies, and so on, even if this is not a climate neutrality compromise or target. Everyone is acting, because this is the new mantra and the scenario, right, for everyone. So and thinking about COP in Brazil, COP30, the US will continue to be part, even though Trump says that he will depart. They will need 1 year, so they will continue to be a part during COP30, which may create a huge problem for the Brazilian presidency of COP30, because they will be seated there, blocking every decision, important decision, and so on. And next year, saying goodbye to everyone. We don't know what's going to happen, but this view of private stakeholders they are engaged, like it or not. This is on the table, and US companies will be engaged. They are engaged because they need to be. Jumping to COP30 in Brazil, there's a lot of rumors about the Brazilian presidency right now, who will be elected as the Brazilian presidency. If it's going to be Minister Marina Silva or Ambassador André Correia do Lago, which I think would be a much more a great president of the COP, because he's a negotiator, and hopefully he will be elected, and maybe we will know this in December, during December. But one important topic for COP30, we will get to know the new climate ambition for 2031, 2035 with the new NDCs. Brazil presented its new NDC in Baku. There's a lot of things going on, because now we need to approve the climate plans to be able to understand what sectors will contribute to get to the target and so on. But we will get in Belem with the new ambition to 2035, and this is the topic for a COP, in my view, that does not depend on the negotiation process, because it's a process of updating the NDCs. So what comes to my mind as a huge decision in COP30, it's combining the finance decision from Baku and the experience related to finance that we have up to now with the adaptation indicators that will be a very important decision, with the just transition decision that was not adopted in Baku and will continue, and it will be adopted in Belem as key outcomes of another COP, right? But the COP from next year, getting the new ambition from the NDCs, the new finance decision, and this need to amplify the sources of finance and how to get there, and how to put countries and different countries, including developing countries, on a path to support climate actions, which puts me to say that COP30, in my perspective, must be the COP of implementation as well, because we will be discussing, we will be knowing the next ambition for 2035 and so on, and finance and adaptation and just transition. There's more than 60 different decisions from Baku, but come on, we need to implement. We need to allow parties to an implementation phase that is really working and building on their actions when it comes to mitigation, adaptation, and so on, because otherwise we will continue to talk about lack of ambition and so on. You hear 5 country speeches at the beginning of every COP or the end of every COP, and it looks all the same. Come on, we need to implement and allow countries to develop and to thrive, considering the different sectors that are part of this transition to a low carbon economy.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo, and interesting insights about how maybe the dynamics and the challenge of COP30 with an exiting US. Your remark about who will be the chair, right? And Ambassador Andre as a good suit because of his diplomatic skills, and he's been with the COPs for a long time as well, right, Rodrigo? I think yeah. So let's see. So this will come out in December, and I understand agroecology has this new approach of monitoring the preparations and preparing companies for COP30. So I think you certainly will share with us what is new, or at least to those who benefit from your advice. But Emily, we have to hear from you with all your political skills and how much you've seen. We would love to hear your take on the challenges for next year.
Well, and as your resident American, I'll give you
exactly
a view from that perspective. So I mean, you know, I'm cognizant of time, and we could probably discuss this for the next 8 hours today. You fully recognizing the new administration coming in, has positioned itself very clearly, I would say, on how they look to approach climate. In my experience and what I anticipate, right, we will certainly move to a more G2G, a government-to-government conversation about how we address some of these challenges. And so, again, I think, this new administration will take office in January, and by the time we get to Belem, we'll have a fairly significant amount of time under our belts, as we say, to understand really and get more clarity on the direction of the new administration. I do think Brazil will be an important partner for the U.S. in the next administration. I think for a very long time, the U.S. has not nurtured the relationship, the trading relationship, and I would say the geopolitical relationship it could have with Brazil. I think there's significant opportunity to make that stronger. And I think the road to Belem, whatever the position of the administration will be, creates an opportunity for that bilateral engagement that we have typically seen from this administration, right? And to be fair, I mean, the U.S. is, though a multilateral player, typically has always really supported those bilateral engagements. And so I do think, that's typically our foreign policy is bilateral, as the conveners of multilateralism, though. So don't underestimate the opportunities, I think, from a G2G engagement on all matters, right? And so, when I look at this too, not only is the geopolitical instability, we have maturing conflicts on various sizes and scales across the globe. And so how we think about this and macroeconomic impacts and inflation and how that then starts to drive climate policy. We've seen that in the past. I'm going to step back, and I'm trying to iterate on everyone's comments in a very short amount of time, because Katie and Rodrigo made wonderful comments that I could totally go down a rabbit hole on with them. But if we look at, not only are we looking at more geopolitical instability, the redefining of multilateralism and these spheres of influence across the world, right? I think that will be a changing dynamic over the next decade, how we start to set up that new world order in many ways. But looking at, Rodrigo, you just touched on it a little bit, and Katie, you started it with CBAM, right? I think when I think about geopolitics from a mining perspective, I very much look at it about market access, being clear. CBAM's a great example of, okay, all the regulations and all the standards we have to achieve in one market. Brazil has a very different set of standards. I operate in Indonesia, a very different set of standards, in the US, right? We have all these integrated markets with very different expectations of producers. And so for me, one thing as we look at the geopolitical winds of change, how we anchor down with clearer expectations for producing sectors like ours, so we're able to continue to thrive on the ESG and hold ourselves very high on that expectation list, but continue to get that market access. I think on the mineral side, the thing I worry about moving forward is the market does not reward currently, as it should, low carbon produced product, right? And as we move into a changing space, that is something that's very cognizant on my mind, is how do we continue and build to reward sustainably and responsibly produced products. Equally, put the US position on climate wherever it may land. The supply and demand curves don't go away, right? From a mining perspective, we can talk about the slowing down of EVs and changes potentially to the IRA that will have global impacts, no doubt. But again, when we look at it, the demand is still there. The demand is still there for electrifying the grids. EVs are just one portion of the overall transition picture, right? And so how, changing in policy does not eradicate demand. We still see a really big driver of demand for critical minerals and responsibly and sustainably produced minerals. I know some people think that's a very conflicting statement, but it's not. It is exactly what we need to be thriving on. And my expectation for COP, Belem's a big deal. That's where we're housed. That's our home. Pará is our home. And we're very proud of that. And we're very proud of being able to demonstrate to the world, in partnership with the government in Pará and in Brazil, the way we've been able to maintain and build responsible mines in the state. And so that's important as we think about that road to Belem. What I'd like to see. I'd like everyone to see how great Vale is at responsibly managing and producing its copper and iron ore. And I wish I had a video. I'd show you this great video of how we've protected the Amazon since 1973 to today. You still look at it and our piece is whole. We have done incredible and taken incredible steps and efforts to ensure that, the Amazon and our footprint is protected. But when you take a step back and look around, that's a different story. And so really for me, the politics of it all then focuses into the local opportunity, and how this COP for me should really be about showcasing a lot of the great examples we see coming out of Brazil. Bioeconomy is something that really excites me. And I think as we tag and look at policy incentives globally, how are we supporting bioeconomy development in Brazil? And how does that then extend globally to address a lot of different climate targets and ambitions, right? Rodrigo, I'm a big lover of agriculture. I married a farmer. I did my part in the agriculture space as well from a policy perspective. And the thing that excites me also about these conversations is the nexus between mining and agriculture. Creating a circular economy in a country like Brazil, I think Brazil is the place to demonstrate it. I think, if you look at Pará and you look at the agriculture needs and you look at mining, there is a clear nexus that we can be a demonstrable, we can implement something, Rodrigo, as you said, showcasing what is possible in this space. We have to stop looking at things in silos. We can't have a zero-sum approach to all of this, and we cannot have, a one-size-fits-all approach to climate in a politically volatile world, right? We need to think about that. So I'm kind of jumping a bit. And then the last point I wanted to leave you on that I think is really important, that touches on what everyone has talked a little bit about, but thinking about it from my perspective in mining, is the concept of beneficiation. When we talk about climate policy and we look at the world that we're moving into, I think it's really important to understand what we mean on beneficiation. And it's not just processing. What does that mean? Does every country really need to be a processor? Does every country really need to, how do we tackle beneficiation so we're protecting our resources, connecting it with climate ambition? But also for me, it's not about just building processing and manufacturing capacity in countries that have natural endowments. It's the social upskilling, it's the job upskilling, the social integration, the shared value. And I think Belem offers us an opportunity to showcase what is possible and implementable, Rodrigo. And it is our home. And so we're very excited and confident. I'm going to leave us on a confident note that Belem can really be that next source of global action. I called Baku home for a long time as well in my previous career. Now I like to think I can call Brazil home as well. And I just truly think that under the leadership of this government in Brazil and what I have experienced in my tenure at Vale, I do think it's an opportunity and has a good chance of being successful on the implementation side. It's just that we cannot come with binary views of how it should be. We have to come with an open set of principles to say this is what it could be. And, I'm a true believer. I'm a politician at heart. The only way we move this forward is through compromise in a practical way, without negating our end goal of meeting the Paris Agreement, right? And I'm just pleased that we're at the table, because I truly believe having the sectors like mining at the table is integral to finding those longer term solutions. We need each other. I mean, there's truly no other option anymore, right? We are all committed to seeing Paris met, but we cannot do it by ourselves. And I know that sounds a little bumper sticker like, but I feel that way very strongly from a mining perspective, is that we have a lot to offer. And I just hope people can open their eyes and we can come to the table and create a much more integrated policy framework that can enable better development in a responsible and sustainable way.
Yes,
Right.
I think this is a great invitation and well said, because it's not only because there is no other option that you take it as it is. And I think the invitation there is to engage, to cooperate, to do better. So I think that's really inspiring. We are coming to a close. I would like to go a final round with each of the speakers and asking each of the speakers to bring forward one word or one sentence about the focus for 2025 and the road to Belem. Before I start with that, I just want to thank everyone who is watching us. We've kept a good level of participants across the time of our panel, and especially I would like to thank Jamili Cruz, who is the vice chair of our ESG and Sustainability Committee, who has been with us throughout the event, as well as everyone else. Thank you so much, and all the others who will watch this later in our channels. But Peter, let's go for this round with our panelists to wrap up. So let's start with Gabriel. Gabriel, one word or one sentence thinking of 2025 and Belem.
Okay, one word, partnerships, I think are fundamental. None of us are gonna overcome this challenge by ourselves. So we need to be humble and we need to work with others. So I think partnerships is going to be key for the future of the climate agenda and for the road to Belem.
Amazing. Katie?
What I was going to say earlier, it's the road to Belem via G7. So I think everybody needs to keep front of mind that Canada is host of the G7 next year and how to leverage that important role, again, multilateralism, and ride that wave, support what we want to see in Belem through a business perspective. That's it.
That's great. Great thoughts. Rodrigo?
Yeah, I think everyone must present their climate actions and put on a basket different actions that are being adopted and must expand, because ultimately we will not get there. And I really liked Emily's view on how mining and agriculture can bring solutions. Yes, they bring solutions. They operate as part of the solution. Otherwise, we will not get there, as Gabriel mentioned as well. There's no silver bullet.
So your one word, Rodrigo, what is it? Agriculture.
Yeah, agriculture for sure, and partnerships, because innovation as one word.
Good. And now the final word with Emily.
Mine's action. I can decide nature or action. You can choose. But I do think, given Brazil's commitment that we can continuously see on climate and the opportunity that they can lay bare for the world, I do think coming out of Baku, we have no choice. Belem must be about action.
That's good. That's very good, Emily. Thank you so much. Thank all of you for your insights, contribution. It was really amazing. We, of course, at this time we saw a few events about about COP29. I think we were able to add a lot of value to the discussions. I think the words we heard are very strong. Partnerships, innovation, effective action, as Emily was saying. And I think on this road, thinking of this year until we reach Belem, there is this very important stopover, Katie, that may tackle many of the geopolitical challenges we are speaking about, which is the stopover in Kananaskis. Is it right? Kananaskis. So I think probably for the sake of the rest of the world, we'll do the stopover in Canada, not Kananaskis for the pronunciations challenges, but definitely, yes. So thank you so much for this enlightful panel. And Peter, over to you for the closing.
Thank you so much. I have to be honest with you. Every time I hear these things, I learn so much. I made some notes. I took some phone calls, but I made some notes, and it was a pretty impressive group. So I really thank you so much. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Katie, Rodrigo, and Gabrielle. Really insightful. And on behalf of the BCCC, of course, I want to thank our guests and our terrific sponsors. So, of course, Valley Base Metals, Mellowhawk, Proactiva Results, BMA Law, and Brookfield, and of course everyone who attended and listened. I appreciate that. I'm sure you're all going home with thoughts percolating in your brain. Remember, on December 10th, we're going to host the Biodiversity COP16, highlights, challenges, and opportunities, where we'll continue our conversation on the recent COP event. Make sure to follow us online for our upcoming initiatives and to review membership and sponsorship opportunities. We are a not-for-profit company and organization, and we count on you. Thank you for joining us today, and count on the BCCC to expand your network in Brazil and Canada. All the best, and have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.